All right. I think we are in business. Everything seems to be working properly this morning. Last week things did not work properly, but hey, uh, we made it happen anyway. I had to adjust the presentation and all that, but I got it on YouTube. It worked out. So um, this week it seems to be things are working right and should work better. Hopefully, hopefully. Let me not jinx myself. Um, who'd like to start us off with prayer, and then we'll get started. I got three jokes. Two are good. Yeah, yeah. Go ahead. Oh, go ahead, Joe. Amen. Thank you. Um, all righty. Couple jokes for you. So a clever thief figured, hey, look, I'm going to start robbing only houses of religious people. I figure that way, they're less likely to beat me up or be violent, right? If they catch me in their home. So he's happens to be one night ransacking this house and makes a little too much noise. And an old Christian man, just a old country Christian guy, whose house it was, he heard him ransacking the house, heard him making noise, and so he come up out of bed and picked up his hunting rifle, made his way downstairs. And while he confronted the thief, the thief looked at him in shock and he said, my friend, he said, I wouldn't do anything to harm you, but you're standing right where I'm about to shoot. All right. Okay. A mother was watching her 4-year-old child play outside in a small plastic pool, and it was filled kind of halfway up with water. And she, watching, just make sure the kid's okay and not doing anything, hurt himself or anything. And he starts walking back and forth across the pool. And she watches him do this several times. Just figures he's playing a game, right? So then he jumps out of the pool and he grabs a little bucket, one of his little buckets, and he starts bailing the water out of the pool, right? So she goes out to ask him, "What are you doing? What? I thought you were enjoying your pool. Why would you take the water out of the pool?" He said, "Well, in Sunday school class today, the teacher said that Jesus walked on water, but my water's not working." All right, all right. You want the third one? All right. All right. Despite a very limited budget, a very frugal pastor and his wife went shopping. And she went and bought herself a really pretty dress for Easter. And her husband, the pastor, said to her, he said, "Well, when you were tempted to buy that, you should have said, 'Get behind me, Satan.'" And she said, "Well, that is what I said. And I heard Satan whisper, 'It looks really good from the back, too.'" All right. So they're all a bust today. Okay. So obviously we're in chapter 9 of Proverbs. This is the last chapter that will be in Proverbs before we begin where I'm going to just kind of group the Proverbs together because we get into that section of Proverbs where it's kind of one-liners mostly. Yet many of them are, as I mentioned last week, related and or even some are exactly the same except for maybe one or two words. And the reason behind that is they are to give us different shades or aspects of the lesson, right? So what we're going to do is I'm going to group those. Just go through and find the ones that are either exactly the same or similar in scope, about the same lesson, and then we'll cover them that way. That way we don't have to go through. Do you know how long it would take if we went through them one by one? It'd take forever. And so I think it'd be better for us to group the like ones together, unless somebody has a better suggestion. Of course, I'd love to hear it. But we'll start that next week. This week we end with the last chapter before that is more, not one-liners. It's as we've been going through like wisdom speeches and things like that. And again, this one's another wisdom speech. and it's as we'll see, this one is. I do want to end. Last week we skipped over the very end of last week, so we're going to start with that before we get into chapter 9, and so that we don't miss it. Right. Um, uh, we had gotten into a good discussion last week, but we skipped these Proverbs 8:32 through 36, and I'd like to cover them because they are kind of related anyway. They lead into chapter 9 of Proverbs. So, who'd like to read for me 8:32 through 36? And I do have it on screen, and it's working. Yay! All right. Yes, sir. Very good. Thank you. Um, okay, so basically the as we remember the beginnings of this particular chapter of Proverbs, it was a personification of wisdom, and ultimately was giving us the different benefits of walking in wisdom, and then it ends here with basically telling us that we should keep wisdom, keep her ways, right, that we should listen to her instruction, not neglect it. Ultimately, what it's telling us is to live a wise life, right? Urging those who are still perhaps uncommitted or not shaped by wisdom to allow their life to be shaped by wisdom. And the call to listen is, like we've seen several times, really a demand for obedience. And we've seen that several times in many different, of these calls to wisdom, right? And the warning of verse 33 is not to neglect or ignore, let loose the wise instruction or the shaping. And the one who listens, obeys, is called blessed, it says in verse both 32 and 34. And it tells us the way to listen is to be eagerly and expectantly watching for the lessons that come to you, right? Um, Life's going to throw us all kind of lessons. We know that, right? God consistently sends us lessons throughout our life, different things, situations He puts us in, life situations, friends, their situations even can serve as examples. And as we learned a few weeks back, even nature itself can serve as a way to teach us through God's wisdom, right? So what this is telling us is to look for those lessons. Don't neglect looking for them. Always be on the watch out for wisdom, for the lessons of wisdom. And if you do that, whoever finds me finds life. So if you do that, you're going to have a better life. You're going to have a more joyous life. You're going to have a life that's more easy, right? Because as we learned last week, you have knowledge that may serve to help you in many different ways. So we should always be searching for wisdom. It should be first and foremost in our mind to look for the wisdom of God in everything that we do, in every way that we do it. He who fails to find me injures himself. All who hate me love death. So effectively, it's telling us there, if you don't find wisdom, it's an injury to you. And it is, isn't it? When you are someone that lacks wisdom, um, you're injured in many different ways, not just physically, but you're injured spiritually. Because when you lack wisdom as a Christian, quite frankly, you're not going to know what is ultimately the word to listen to and not the word to listen to, right? You're going to have a hard time discerning between folly and truth. And with that comes all kinds of slippery slopes, obviously, that we've talked about, right? If you are as we've learned, the Christian who is naive or easily swayed because you lack wisdom, you can easily be trapped by Satan's tricks and led down a path that you don't want to go. So ultimately, it's telling us that injury to yourself will come if you fail to listen for those lessons that God's trying to teach you. And ultimately, every part of your life, you can find a lesson. I'm sure of it. If you look, but you got to look. And that's the other thing. You've got to seek wisdom to find it. It doesn't always just jump in your lap. Now, sometimes it does, right? Sometimes God knocks you on the head, or at least He does me. And He'll give you a lesson that ultimately you need to hear because you weren't listening, and He'll force it on you. But that doesn't happen so often. right? I find that the best lessons usually are the ones I look for, the ones I seek after. And that's what it's teaching us here. And it's also telling us that all who hate me love death, right? They ultimately look at death as, oh, well, I'm going to the grave, right? How many people have you heard that aren't Christian that basically, oh, well, we're just all going to rot in the earth later? That's a big deal, right? So for them, death is no big deal. It truly is not. They don't truly understand that that's not the end. That's only the beginning of eternity. And unfortunately, they've been deceived to believe that they can love death, that death is okay, because death is only an end to either their misery here or the fact that they got away with every sin they committed, right? In their mind, oh well, there is no consequence, right? So they love death. And it's because they have failed to look for wisdom in their life, the wisdom of God, who teaches us that that's not the end. We don't just rot in the ground and you're over and you blank out and it's over. That's not how it works. Thankfully, we're more enlightened. We have more wisdom to know that that's not the case. But unfortunately, there are many that don't. I don't know if I've told, I'm sure I have. But if I haven't, if I have or haven't, sorry if I'm repeating something. There's a gentleman that I know that does healthcare, part of my healthcare team, so to speak, right? And when I first met him, he told me he was an atheist, that he didn't believe in God, that it was, God, what God? Yeah, okay, fairy tales, right? And over the course of time, he now does believe in God. He goes to church. He takes his kids to church, his wife to church, who never went to church before. But when I originally talked to him, the reason I bring this up, when I originally talked to him, his attitude was exactly this: that death, who cares? I'm going to rot in the ground, whatever. I'm gone. I won't know anything. I won't know any better. And I told him, unfortunately, you've been deceived. That's not true. And you need to truly realize that deception is going to cost you eternity. And eventually, it took a while, it took over a year of just, and I didn't shove things down his throat because you can't do that. That doesn't work, right? People that are deceived over time. They're not deceived overnight, hopefully, unless they're a fool. And there are some of those too, but he wasn't a fool. He's very intelligent. And it just took, I would send him stuff and hope that he would look, right? Hope that he would listen, hope that he would take it. And eventually he did. And thankfully, thank God he did. But he was just as deceived as everybody else. So understand that a lot of that is the problem. They think they're wise, yet they are fools, right? And that's the truth. And I told him, I sent him a video one time that said, I'm not, what was the title of that? I'm not dumb enough to be an atheist, or I'm not ignorant, something. I was not foolish enough to be an atheist. Um, and it sounds like a harsh title. But the truth, he kept telling me science, 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 science. Yeah, I agree with you. Science proves God, though. It doesn't prove the opposite. And so over time, with showing him the truth that science proves God exists rather than his false ideology that had been fed to him over years, and he had some anger with God, and that tends to be it too. When you find an atheist, they usually are angry about something at God. And that's why they choose to not listen. That's why they choose to turn off what they know is true. Anyway, so help those people in that situation. Give them the wisdom that they're failing to hear, or help them find it, right? Yes, 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 yes. Hmm. Right, right. Yes, absolutely right. And what you just mentioned is absolutely true. We as Christians are aware of the spiritual battle that's going on. We don't see it, right? Think back to Elijah when he showed his servant the true battle that was happening around them. he opened his eyes and told him, look, this is truly what's happening. And he saw, I think, if I recall the scripture right, 150 chariots of fire surrounding Elijah. And he said, I have nothing to worry about. You see, I'm not one man. I have an army. And he showed him, right? And we understand that, whereas you're right, most who are not Christian don't get that. They don't get it at all. They're deceived to not even realize there's a spiritual battle going on. Yes. Mm. Sure. 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 Well, to answer how I would approach it, yes. If a child comes in and asks, "Does your dad believe in God?" Yes, yes, I do. And if you'd like to know why, I'd be more than happy to tell you. And approach it that way. If the kid's interested and curious, he's asking because he's curious. You understand that? He's heard one story from his mother and father, and God in him is enlightening this child that there's more than one answer out there. And so by him doing that, he's reaching out. Yes, and applaud that. And if his parents don't send him back to your house, at least he got to hear the one time of the truth, right? So yeah, always, if especially with children, because they are being so deceived, and you might even help those parents. Now that you know that, you might want to reach out to those parents and help them see the truth. Because ultimately, if you can get them to see the truth, then they'll turn and teach your children. Just like this gentleman I was just mentioning, his whole family now is being brought up to know Christianity, whereas they didn't before, to know God. Whereas before, he didn't help them at all in that. Yes. 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 We're going to get to that in verse chapter 9. Yes. Sure. 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 Yeah. Yes. 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 Absolutely. 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 And encourage your children to share their faith, because you're absolutely right. They are their peers. Now they may hear something from you that as Grant was saying, a seed from you is still good, but your child is going to have more sway in their life, obviously, because they're a peer. So yeah, always encourage your children to share their faith and teach them how to not be afraid of it, how to not be fearful of sharing their faith. Because guess what? That's the hard part. That's the hard thing. That's the hard thing you have to get over, right? It's hard sometimes for us as adults to share our faith. We're fearful of it. So imagine your child surrounded by the world that we're in today. How much more fearful it is for them. So definitely try and help them see past that fear. Yes. Yes. Sure. Sure. Of course. Sure. Right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I would love if I had a situation where a parent then gets upset with me for talking to their child. Great. Now I have an opportunity to talk to them. Let's have a meeting. Let's have a meeting about that. I'd love to talk to you about that. So yeah, use it as an opportunity. Yeah. Yes. Probably for the better. Exactly. Exactly. Yes. Mhm. Yes. It does. It does. And I'll tell you, and you're touching on something very important, and that is anything that we want to do or anything that we are afraid of doing, the more you take an opportunity to do it, the less afraid you become of it, right? Because you're like, oh, I've done that now 20,000 times. Who cares? It's no big deal anymore. The first time, second time, sure, it's a little scary. But something else, you have probably the best story you can tell anybody about God, and that's your own story. So no matter what you know about the Bible, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Your own story is the most powerful story you'll ever tell. Even if you have knowledge of the Bible left, right, up, and down. So remember that and start there. And then as you grow with it and as you get more experience with sharing your faith, then branch out, then learn verses, then other lessons. Yes, sure. Yes. Sure. Awesome. Mhm. Sure. And sure. No, absolutely. And promote growth, but we're not the ones that make the growth. You're absolutely right. Mhm. Well, you will know eventually. You will know because you'll face them all one day in heaven. Promise you. Yes, Brian. It's awesome. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. And if you start there, you'll grow in your own ability to share your faith. Yes, Jimmy. Mhm. Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. Right. And if they do, oh well, they take you home. Hmm. Sure. Right. Right. And even that worst may not be the end. Even that worst may not be the end. It's the end that day, but it may not be the end. Because God, of course, is working where we're not, right? Obviously. Now, He used you that particular day, but it may be you're one of eight over the course of that week that finally the eighth one that approaches that person, it finally happens, right? So we, our little piece of the puzzle is important. Um, or God wouldn't have put you there, right? Understand that every part of that is important, or you wouldn't be there. God placed you there for a purpose. God put that situation in front of you for a purpose. So even if it doesn't work out that day, that doesn't mean that those words you spoke that day don't hit that person 20 years later, because they might. They might. Yes. Sure. Yes. Exactly. Because again, yes. Yes. Exactly. Exactly. Every piece of the puzzle is important. Every piece. God doesn't make mistakes, guys, ever. So even when you do and you think it's a mistake, it's not. There was a reason for it either way. Yes, Jimmy. Mm-hmm. 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 Yes. Right. Absolutely. So again, when you're put in those positions, God wants you there. So God put you there. So take advantage of what's going on. Follow God's will. Yes. Yes. Sure. Sure. But you know, God is also shaping you. As He's shaping those other people, He's shaping you. And again, all of these are circumstances not just to help that other person. They're there to shape you. They're to bring you closer to your faith. And the closer you are to your faith, the easier it is for you to share your faith, right? Something that you love, you share, right? You have a love for cooking. You tend to want to cook for people. You have a love for whatever. I mean, I can name 20 different hobbies, right? You tend to do those hobbies and want to bring other people with you while you're doing them. Same thing with God. The more you find that your faith grows, the more you want to share that faith, the more you want to bring others to that faith, and the more you realize the gift that it is. So, yeah, definitely enjoy those opportunities that you have to grow yourself as you're helping someone else in turn. We're all on a path, right? We're all at different points on that path, and you know, you may be here and they may be here, right? But that doesn't matter. God put you together that day because your paths served a purpose together that day. So enjoy that and take advantage of it when you can, and learn. Become more wise yourself through sharing wisdom. And excellent wisdom, actually, Jimmy. I don't think that one liner you could have shared much better. All right. Any other thoughts, and then we'll move on to the yes. Right? Sure. Sure. I got all kinds of. I don't wear them to church because they're like T-shirts, but I got all kinds of shirts, and most of my shirts have either a saying of God on them or something, related to God. Because yes, you should always, if you can, always advertise God. Right? You are the best billboard for God is your life. And the best way that you can share God is through your own experiences and the way you act, the way you teach, the way you talk, the way you help people, right? The way you treat others is a billboard for God. So yeah, yes. Mhm. Sure, sure, exactly, exactly, exactly. Yeah, right. Started with one. Yes. Mhm. Right. 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 Yes. Right. Absolutely. He was at times. Yeah. Well, if you read the book of Acts, yes. 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 And I tell you, Acts, the book of Acts, several spots in the book of Acts, I think it's Acts chapter 2, he actually says that he was so overjoyed to see that there were brothers among the people when he had, come to that particular town, meaning that it had spread ahead of him. And he was overjoyed that Christianity had spread ahead of him. And yeah, absolutely. We are nothing more than God's servants, and ultimately He will use us for His purpose. And we should be happy about the ride. Yeah, yeah, Ichthus. Sure, sure, good. Yeah, right. Sure, sure. Some places, perhaps. Um, but look, I, and in that regard, your reward is in heaven. So God's going to protect you, and He's going to take you home when it's His time. So, irregardless of whether you're fearful or not, fear is from Satan. It's not from God. I promise you. The Bible teaches us fear does not come from God. Fear of God is not meaning to be afraid of Him, even. So don't be afraid. When you're sharing God's truth, God will either protect you, and if it's time for you to come home, it doesn't matter what you're doing. He's gonna take you anyway, whether you're sharing His word or not. Um, Fear of God, or when you read in the Bible, fear the Lord. It doesn't mean fear Him as in fear Him, be afraid of Him. It means fear Him as in know Him as God. Fear Him, give Him His place in your life that He deserves, and that is as God, not as somebody you fear. Um, and fear otherwise is from Satan. Never be from God. All right, let's move on. We're never going to get to we're never going to get to our lesson today. Actually, that we're yes. All right, let's do that. All right, who'd like to read for me Proverbs 9, 1 through 6? We'll make this. We got 20 minutes. We can do this. Yes, sir. Oh, six. Stop at six for me. Thank you. That's okay. All right. So basically, wisdom here. First of all, the Bible is just full of not just opportunities to learn and wisdom and stories about wisdom and all that, but it also the language and just the way it's presented sometimes is really cool, right? And we're going to talk about a little bit of that with these verses here. Wisdom's seen, right, as sympathizing for us, as caring for us, right? Loving us, building a house for us, right? And ultimately, it's represented as furnishing the house, building the dwelling, cooking a dinner for us and all that, right? And when it says she slaughtered her beasts, it's not meaning as in a sacrifice like a Jewish sacrifice. It means literally that she is, that's why it's slaughtered, is the word that's used. It denotes that she's cooking you a meal. Wisdom is creating a meal for us. And that meal that she's creating is wisdom, obviously, right? So she slaughtered her beast, she's mixed her wine, she set her tables. So she's ready, wisdom is ready to give you all of the benefits of wisdom. And set out the young women to call from the highest places in town. We talked about that a couple of Proverbs back, where again, wisdom is everywhere if you're willing to look for it. Whoever's simple, let him turn in here. To him who lacks sense, she says, come and eat of my bread and drink of my wine. I have mixed. Now, something I want to mention, and you'll probably notice, the last few times that we've had a call from wisdom when it was personified, the first time she called out to three groups. Do you remember? She called out to the simple, the scorners, and the simples, the scorners, and the sorry, I'm losing the word. Anyway, she called out to all three groups: simple, scorners, and anyway, yes. Move on. But she here is only calling out to the simple, right? She's not calling out to all three groups as she's done in the past. What she's saying here is, look, I've presented wisdom to you in several different ways, right? We've seen wisdom presented in several different ways. And it's telling us that ultimately wisdom is for those that need wisdom, right? For the simple, those that are needing to learn. And it's all there if you're willing to accept it, right? The scoffer is the person that just says, I don't need that. That's not important to me, right? And of course, she's tried to reach out to the scoffer. Wisdom's tried to reach out to the scoffer, but the scoffer is going to scoff, right? And then the person who's wicked, who just doesn't care, that person is never going to listen anyway. As you started to read, we'll read about that next. So let's go ahead and read that. Oops. Let's read, can you go ahead and read 7 through 12 for me? Yep. 11 and 12. Yep. Now, a couple quick things. Many scholars believe that these few verses were inserted, right? They think that the original reading of this was 1 through 6, and then 13 through 20, whatever it is that ends it. 13 through 18, sorry. And they think that these several verses were added. They're good verses, but they weren't in the original script. Now, they ended up being in the Bible, of course, but when Solomon originally wrote this, they think that he either or someone either added to this later. And why they added it is some important things to know. One, do not reprove a scoffer or he will hate you, right? A scoffer, again, is somebody that thinks, I don't care. God doesn't exist. It doesn't affect me. We're going to rot in the ground, yada, yada. We've talked about the scoffer several times. So when it says do not reprove a scoffer or he'll hate you, meaning don't try and correct somebody that's a scoffer. If they don't believe in God and you're telling them, somebody was talking to me about this morning, if they don't believe in God or they have not given their life to Christ fully yet, and you are telling them, hey, look, you need to do this, that, and the other, or if you're trying to rebuke them, they're not going to listen to you. They're going to hate you, right? As it says, they're not going to listen. Instead of trying to call out what they're doing wrong, instead show them what to do right. Don't rebuke them. Don't be their conscience, right? Let God be their conscience. Your job isn't to be somebody else's conscience. Your job isn't to tell them, oh, that's wrong, don't do that. Your job is to say, well, let me tell you, how I handle that or whatever. Show them the positive. Don't call out their negative. Does that make sense? Because if you are saying to somebody, you're doing this wrong, you're effectively only going to get back that they're not going to listen to you, right? Because people don't want to hear when they're doing wrong, number one, especially if they don't believe in Christianity in the first place. The last thing they're going to do is want to hear what you've got to say, right? And when you're telling them you're breaking God's commandments, to them that means nothing. If they don't believe God exists, then who cares if God doesn't like what I'm doing, right? So they're not going to hear you, and all they're going to do is, as it says, hate you. So instead of working on what they've done wrong, get them to see the big picture first. Get them to understand that God exists first, and then you can bring them down the path of discipleship. But until they're a believer of God, you're going the wrong way. Let me get Brian first, and I'll come to you, Grant. Yes. 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 Right. 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 Exactly. Right. 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 Yes. Yes. Right. Right. And adding to that, ultimately, as an example, if I were to see somebody lying, if I went to them and said, God says, thou shalt not lie, they're not going to hear it. Not going to hear it because number one, they don't believe in God. But if I go to them and say, look, if you lie, you might get into a situation where it's going to harm you. Now they might hear you. Do you see the difference? Instead of calling out their sin and telling them you're sinning, you tell them why it's probably better that they don't. Instead of explaining the sin, you explain what happens when you sin. You explain the proverb that comes, right? The effect of their sin and how it can be negative for them. And then they're going to hear that because now it matters to them. But thou shalt not lie doesn't matter to a person that doesn't believe in God. They don't care because to them a lie is part of the deal. They trust me. Before I was a Christian, I lied with the rest of them, right? And didn't think anything of it because oh well, if you can be manipulated, that's you. Was my attitude. And unfortunately, that is their attitude. So if I would have at that time heard "Thou shalt not lie," so God tells me not to lie. I don't believe God exists. So why do I care? Yes, Grant. Yes. Mhm. Right. Exactly. Exactly. Oh, sure. Right. Here's the difference. Those people that were not believers, as you said, he didn't do that, right? But those that professed to know God, that then were not doing what they professed, then yeah, he had harsh language for, as he should, as we should. If you see a brother that's not doing what a brother's supposed to do, don't do it in public. But you take him to the side, you tell him, you're messing up. You're doing wrong. This is not what God called you here for. Be open and be honest and be upfront. Hold on to the truth, right? And they'll respect you for it. Hopefully, a wise man will hear you and learn from it. But sure, exactly, exactly, exactly. Indeed, indeed. Yes, right. And that's what this is teaching, exactly what you're saying. Yeah. You need to make sure your audience is something that you understand before you, if it's a scoffer, handle them a certain way. If it's a scorner, a person that is wicked, another way, as it's telling us. And if it's somebody that's a believer, that's a whole nother way. Yes, and then yes, yes. Sure, 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 sure. Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, right, right, right. Sure. And sure. 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 Absolutely. Yeah. And that's part of being wise is learning you don't have all of the answers, right? And if you think you do, yeah, you might want to check because you probably don't. Yes, and then yes, Brian. Sure. Exactly. Right. Exactly. Exactly. And that's effectively what this is trying to teach us is if we go at it as an all self-righteous kind of attitude as we're trying to reprove or rebuke someone, uh, that's not the right way. It's not going to work. They're not going to hear you, and you've wasted your time. You've actually created a situation where they hate you. And guess what? Now, if they hate you, are they ever going to hear you again? No. So you burnt a potential opportunity to help that person simply because you were in too much zeal trying to tell them how they were doing wrong. So be careful that you are not exactly what you're saying, that you're not being judgmental. Yes, Brian. Sure. Right. Mhm. Mhm. Sure. Um, he who's cast no sin throw the first stone. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Exactly. Very true. Very true. And because of that we do know a couple things. We know everybody's a sinner, right? Even though some believe they're not. And we know that none are worthy of the kingdom of God. That the only way we're worthy is by Jesus Christ, right? So with those two pieces of knowledge, you can actually it can help you in a lot of ways with helping people. Yes, yeah, exactly, absolutely, yes, yes, right, right, sure, right, right. Oh, of course, of course, yes, yeah. The best witness is your own life. Exactly. And I know no doubt that a lot of what helped that gentleman I was referring to earlier was each time I saw him, I'm consistent, right? I am the same every day in and out, whether I'm here, I'm at home, I'm whatever. I'm not any different anywhere. And he saw that, right? And he recognized, look, this ain't just this guy talking trash. This ain't this guy telling me something, to try and be self-righteous. He lives it. And that of course, made him more open to hearing what I had to say. Because not only did I believe it, I live it. And if I live what I believe, then darn right he knows I believe it fully. So yeah, sure, right, sure. Some, not all. Now some aren't ready yet. They're sure. Oh yeah, of course, of course. But don't get discouraged just because somebody turns you off. That's my point, right? Because there are going to be some that do very quickly because we're already past time. Yep. Right. Right. Don't push them to hate you because then you burnt that opportunity. Absolutely. All right, guys. Excellent class. Sorry we went at 2 minutes over. Everybody have a great week. I will see y'all next week, and we'll be doing. I'll see if we need to finish this or how we'll do it next week. We'll see. We'll probably end this at the beginning of the class and then move forward. All right. God bless everybody. Have a good week.